Hello, Author Nation. Welcome back to another Author Nation State of the Nation podcast, and we're excited to have you here for another jam-packed episode. We've got host Jamie Davis talking to Michael Evans, CEO of Ream, and Author Nation's Northeast Regional Coordinator Ellis Prybylski, and sci-fi author Kevin McLaughlin. So stick around. We're going to be talking about building your publishing team and growing your writing craft. You won't want to miss this. See you on the other side.
Hi, this is the State of the Nation podcast recorded in Boston from the Harvard iMedia Lab studios. I'm your host for these episodes, Jamie Davis, Conference Director for Author Nation and an urban fantasy author. Today, we're going to be talking about building your publishing team, which is so important, and also growing your writing craft skills. And I can't wait to jump into this, but I want to introduce my panel first. First up, I want to welcome back Ream CEO and storyteller advocate Michael Evans. Welcome back, Michael.
Great to be here.
And we also have Author Nation Northeast Regional Coordinator, Prybylski, or Ellis.
Yes, hi.
And good morning. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, it's great. I'm very excited.
And finally, we have Kevin McLaughlin back with us. Kevin is a member of our Author Nation Planning Committee. Welcome back, Kevin.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
So let's kick off this episode with a question about the importance of building the author team. And I'm going to direct this to you, Ellis. Most of us like to think of our work as writers as a lonely endeavor. You know, we're just always alone in our room, or maybe even if we're in a coffee shop, we're still alone. Building a team to support our work is incredibly important, though. So would you like to talk about some ways authors can identify and select who those key team members, such as editors, cover designers, marketers, who they can be?
Yeah, absolutely. So people who don't know me, I come from a traditional publishing background. I owned a traditional publishing company for a long time. And so I know a lot about building a team, because that's one of the things that most authors underestimate the value of is the team, because publishing your book is not a solo effort. Like writing is just ourselves, the computer, and nobody else. But like when you're getting ready to hit publish, it becomes a different game. So finding people, there are a lot of sharks in our water, so identifying the people who are safe to talk to and who you can work with safely is a big thing. And I spend a lot of time working with authors to prevent them from getting fleeced, because that happens so much. It's awful.
Yeah. Well, let's delve into what are some of the key indicators that you've got the right person. Let's start with editor.
Yeah. So with editors, one of the things you want to look for is whether or not they're a member of a professional organization. So there are a bunch of them out there. A lot of authors don't know about it because they're not in that sphere. So you have the Editorial Freelancers Association. I'm the Northeast Coordinator, chapter head for that. You have the CIEP, Editors Canada. There's a bunch of regional organizations. If they've got a membership to one of those, chances are they're legit. And they may not be the cheapest editor, but they are somebody who's going to be legitimate and treat you well. They're not going to, take your money and run, because they'll get booted out of the organization and get blacklisted. And that's going to be a real problem if they want to find other work. So that's one of the big ones. Michael,
when you were working, you're a sci-fi author too, so you had works that needed editing and you needed a team to put that together. What was it like finding that for the first time?
Well, it came after a huge mistake, because the first book I published, I went with the Vanity Press because I thought it would be easier, and spent $4,000, which was at the time like all the money I'd saved working up over the summer. I think I was like making $9.25 an hour at the pool, and like was working full time, and all that went towards that one book. And I thought it would work out, and I made $400 back. So it was, it was a learning experience. But after that, my first thought was I should probably figure out how to do this cheaper. Because for those who don't know, $4,000, I mean, there's been some inflation since I started 7 years ago. But like $4,000 is crazy for your first book, in my opinion. That's a lot of money. You shouldn't be spending that much. You can do it you can really do it for under $1,000, in my opinion. And that's certainly where I got it down to eventually. What I did from there was, for my editor, I contacted an author whose books I really liked, a fellow indie author, and he was a sci-fi author. And I said, hey, just wanted to let you know I love your book. And if you don't mind, I'd love to know who your editor is, if you're willing to share, because I would like to use them. And that's how I did it. And he responded, a total stranger. It was just a cold email. Then cover designer was someone on a podcast that I really enjoyed about books. I forgot which one it is because I've listened to so many and I don't think it's around anymore. But his wife, he mentioned, was a cover designer. And I was like, this feels like a good place to trust and start because I really liked him just from listening to the podcast. And that worked out. So I was too scared to actually talk to their authors, which I actually recommend doing that now. Like participate in a Facebook group, a Discord, and get to know other authors. I was a little too scared for that. So I just was like, please just tell me. And then I'll come in and I'll get my editor and then kind of go back to my corner. But that's how I did it.
Kevin, what about you?
Well, in my first book, I paid $5 total for everything. That was for some stock art because I did my own cover, and I had a friend who was a college professor who did the editing for free because she liked me. And, I don't necessarily recommend that as best practice. At this point, I mean, Ally is one of the Alliance of Independent Authors has a list of carefully vetted people for pretty much anything you could possibly want to do. So that would be one of my first picks is to go to that list and look for people there. But the other thing that I do now is I talk to other authors, and I would strongly recommend just get involved in the community because there are groups on Facebook where you can join to get information about cover artists, and there's groups out there on the internet, a variety of them, that you can ask, hey, I need a good editor. Does anybody have a good recommendation on a copy editor? Somebody who's worked well for you. Ask for those recommendations from other authors. That's one of the most valuable pieces of the writing community sometimes.
So for some of our listeners or viewers that are new authors, there's the mystique of the editor and the different kinds of editors. And so you might spend a lot of money on a developmental editor when what you needed was a copy editor.
Yeah, you might. That is absolutely a thing that can happen. Generally speaking, if you're talking to a legit editor, they will tell you what you need to know. The number of times I've spent coaching authors like, okay, so talk to me about where you are and we'll talk about what you need. I do sample edits and I can usually tell pretty quickly what kind of editing something needs. I have run into a few times when I'm neck deep into a book and realize that there's developmental problems that I can't address during a line edit, and then I'll go back and talk to them about that. But sometimes they don't want to, or can't afford to have me do the developmental editing, and we'll just finish the line edit and call it good. But usually that's how most of us work, is we have the ethics of like, hey, I've run into this thing, let's have a conversation. But I also don't want to tell people to hire me for the most expensive kind of editing when that's not what they need. So I prefer to do a sample, talk to them and find out where they're at and give them more information rather than just, try and upsell them all the time.
And a line edit and a copy edit, are they the same thing?
It depends on who you talk to. Okay. So on Readsy, which is a place you can find vetted editors, by the way, is a great resource. But Readsy lumps the two of them together. Most of the time, line editing and copy editing are separated. Sometimes people call line editing heavy copy editing. And so it gets weird. And not even every editor agrees what they are. So
I like the EFA's lines on that. Developmental is about plot structure. Yep. Line is about making the prose more beautiful.
Yes.
Copy editing is about removing spelling, punctuation, grammar, and consistency errors.
It's also about clarity, too. Like if a sentence is unclear, copy editing will sometimes clear that.
Yeah. But sometimes line editing, and that's where they blur.
Yeah, exactly.
I've done this before, too, professionally.
Yeah, exactly. There's some blurred lines. So, yeah, I agree, though. The EFA guidelines are fantastic.
They really
also,
are.
the EFA rate sheet is a really great resource for people. It doesn't set rates, but what it does is it reflects the median industry rate for everybody in the EFA, and can be a great place to look at how much something might cost. You can find people who work for a lot less than that. There are also people who work for more than that.
I don't know a single indie author who pays even half what the EFA recommends for copy edits.
My clients pay me.
That's fair.
So
I
mean, there are a lot of people who tend to look for very, very cheap, but I find people who pay me without much issue. So
and it's about connecting as well, because one of the things that I had an editor tell me right near the beginning of my author journey that what they'd like to do, if I was open to it, was give me one thing every time they're finished editing that I can work on in the next manuscript.
Yeah.
And I have used that to improve my craft. 50 books. I mean, you think about the incremental improvement that happens over 50 books where you're working on one single piece of craft, where get rid of the that's, that kind of stuff. It is really interesting to see how that kind of relationship can develop over time. And it is about relationships in this business, right?
Oh, yeah.
Very much, yeah.
Yeah. I've got authors with whom I'm really, really close and like lifelong friendships out of them being clients at one point. And some of my best friends are people who I've been their editor for 10 years. And they're wonderful.
And getting that good team is important because when you can write the book and know that you have the process of here's who I'm going to hand it off to, this is the edits I'm going to get back, this is the brief I'm giving to the cover designer, this is the whole process, it makes you be able to focus on what you do best, which is creating awesome stories. And of course, when you're getting it all set up, especially the first time, it's hard. But it's really hard too when it changes. Like, editors do move on, cover designers do move on. We all have career changes, and it's hard to then like actually build that relationship with someone else. Like, oh my God, like you had that for a long time.
Well, and editors have different, and I've seen this with the multiple editors that I've worked with over the years, they all have a slightly different level of what they see as their position with your voice.
Yes.
And that's important, especially in fiction, where voice is maybe sentence fragment is the way a certain character talks.
Yep.
And you don't want to correct the grammar of that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. If grammar and punctuation, it's honestly, when I'm looking at a manuscript, I'm more interested in internal consistency. So it doesn't matter. Like, I'm not trying to turn everybody into the same voice, because if I edited everybody to the APA or CMOS guidelines, everyone might start sounding the same. But if you really start like looking at, no, this is how this author writes, and I want to make sure that this author's writing stays consistent throughout, whether they use toward or towards, for example. Like, let them do their thing so long as it's consistent and it's not egregiously wrong.
That is like my bane of my existence. I forget which one I'm using at any given time.
I just leave
across
S
books.
off everything that I can put an S on. I just remember I always put the S off whenever.
Fortunately, the answer to that is a pretty simple find and replace. You can just Control
Right.
H global find and replace it and just make it the same. So
That's great.
that one's easy.
There are other members of the author team that I think, we can talk about editors for a long time, but there are people like narrators who are really co-creators with you in the journey. And Kevin, you've worked with narrators and at least, to have your books narrated, and it's almost like it's a different book at that point.
It can be.
Not in a bad way, but the performance brings another level to
it's
your book.
Audiobook narration is definitely a creative pursuit. I would definitely call it a creative pursuit in the same way that writing is. It's acting. It's like, like if I'm on stage performing Shakespeare, I didn't write it, but I'm still creating an art by performing this thing. So narrators are doing the same thing with audiobooks. Yeah.
And what are some of the ways, if you engage with narrators, just thinking of them as part of your team, where you're working with them on promotion or anything like that?
In an ideal world, and some of the best narrators out there have their own email lists, and when they release, when they have something that they've narrated released, they go and hit their email list, same as we do. And like a good narrator might pull in like an extra 500 or 1,000 or more buyers because of who they are. Their name actually brings in someone, and that could be extremely powerful. You don't have to go with a famous actor or something like that either. I know that's really popular for some big books from big publishers, but smaller narrators are building their own fan bases in the same way that we do. And there are listeners who follow them from one book to another, even cross genres sometimes, because they just love that narrator so much that they'll listen to anything that narrator talks about.
Yeah, I don't do – my wife does that. I don't do that, but I do perk up when I see a narrator for a book I'm looking at. That'll push me over the edge to buy, certainly.
Can I share a hot take on narrators?
Go ahead.
The hot button topic, of course, has to be like, frankly, the whole narration side of the industry is getting disrupted right now.
Right.
In a huge way.
Yeah.
But I think that we have to reimagine it, because right now narrators are effectively paid most of the time. There is revenue share sometimes, but they're paid mostly as contractors. Even as revenue share, a lot of authors view it, if you do like the revenue split, it's viewed oftentimes not as much of a partnership, but more so as I can't afford to pay them up front, so take a bet on me. And it's still kind of like almost like goodwill, almost still, again, contracting relationship. And I think it's much more valuable to think of it in a co-creator type of relationship where ultimately for all the stories that never were going to, or at least up to this point, have sold enough to be able to afford to pay for the production of an audiobook, we're seeing that all of these authors are going to maybe not choose to have that narration paid for in what was a higher lift way, which is both there's a positive and a negative to it. The negative externality is there's some folks who were right in the middle of that line that were struggling to pay for these things but still were, but now we're flipping to the cheaper alternative, which is ultimately taking away work for some narrators. But the upside in this is there's people making literally, I've seen this because I focus on subscriptions all the time. Fool and Scholar is a combination of one writer, one narrator. They're making $6 figures a year in a subscription doing early access audio. Like you can, when you actually work together and take the elevation and the creativity to the next level, true co-creators, there is really interesting partnerships here. But like that's tough. But I think that's going to become something we just have to see more of, where narrators are really building their own brands, their own businesses, and doing it in partnership with authors.
Another aspect of our community of publishing is the graphic design and things like that. We talked about cover designers a little bit, but you do maps.
Yep, I do maps. I do fantasy maps. That's cool. And I've done non-fantasy maps as well. I did one recently for a romance author who wanted a small town map done. It was a lot of fun. And yeah, the internal design stuff is important. Also, typesetting is more important than a lot of people think. I mean, there's with the advent of Atticus and Vellum, which I have nothing bad to say about, by the way. They are wonderful programs. I think there's also, sometimes people forget that typography is really important. And choosing the typography really is almost as much of a character in the story as the story itself sometimes. So the right chapter headers and the right body text really adds something to it. Like you wouldn't use the same font for a noir as you would for a romance. And they have feels to them. And that's not something you can get with some of these programs because they're so limited, which is done on purpose to prevent people from accidentally using fonts they don't have rights to. But yeah, that internal design stuff really makes a huge difference for authors.
It's a blind spot for a lot of indie authors because we've been so focused on ebooks for so long.
Yeah.
I mean, the average indie author, I think, is probably selling at least 99% ebooks.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And so print is an afterthought for us in a lot of ways. But now with direct sales and Kickstarters and all this stuff starting to become much more important, now we have to start paying much more attention. And I do think that Vellum is making great strides. Atticus too, making great strides to add more features. Like some of the stuff they've been doing lately is amazing. And I think they're going to continue upping their game because I think we're going to start insisting on it.
Yeah, they need to. I have nothing bad to say about them. I've been doing typesetting since before they came out, so using them it feels constraining to me because I've tried and it just didn't feel right.
I did my first typesetting back in like 1980.
You get it. I've been doing it since 2009.
My parents owned a typographic business back
That's amazing.
in the 70s. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool. So yeah, then you absolutely get it.
Yeah.
Kevin, what are some of the ways that people can balance their budgeting? Obviously, as an established author, it's not as huge a concern, but it still is in there. You know, what can I afford to build into the launch of this book that includes cover design and editor and proofreader and a map or whatever else is appropriate for your book? What are some of the ways that a new author can balance where they're focusing their energy and their wallet?
Wow. Okay. So the couple things that I would look at for as a new author would be, first off, anything that is a long-term that any investment that will give me long-term dividends is probably worthwhile. If you can afford a good, and I mean good, and vet the person super carefully because developmental editing is the hardest area to vet carefully.
It is.
But if you can get a good developmental edit on your first or second or third book, if you can afford that, it is worth every cent you pay for it because the leveling up that it will give your craft is just amazing.
Yeah.
So I would look for things like that pay long-term dividends, and I would focus less on spending a lot of money on things that I'm going to change in 5 years anyway. So I would rather go with a Get Covers $35 cover. They do decent $35 covers.
Yeah.
And pay for a developmental edit on my first book. if I had to choose between doing a $2,000 beautifully illustrated painted cover or getting a $2,000 really solid developmental edit. I would go with the developmental edit 100% of the time for a new author. Now, for an experienced author who already has 50 books out, you may not even need developmental edits anymore.
Yeah.
And at that point, the $2,000 cover probably makes way more sense.
Yep.
Doing other things like adding maps, adding, like painted sides on your hard covers, whatever it is you want to do, the fancy frills, add that stuff in. But for early on, focus on long-term investments.
What's your advice?
Oh, I would 100% agree with that. When you're starting off, you want to put all of your you want to find out what your needs are. So do you need developmental editing, or have you studied storycraft really hard for a long time and just not published yet? So would you be better off spending that money on something else like marketing or some other element of it? So you need to identify what your personal needs are. When I came into the editing industry, my personal needs were different than a lot of people. I met the guy that hired me in a bar, so that was a different experience. So that was a thing. But it was... You really want to dig into what do you need as a person to further your career. I agree developmental edits are going to be like probably one of the core things.
If you can afford it.
Yeah.
Even a developmental review. Like some people are doing really cheap operations for that.
I do those too. I do manuscript overviews, like the analysis.
Yes, I do those for really like dirt cheap for new authors and stuff.
Yep, same thing.
Yeah. One thing I did early on was create I don't know, and not too in depth, but I created an outline of my book, my story, with some a paragraph for each chapter.
Yeah.
And I gave that to a developmental editor, which was a lot less expensive.
Yes.
But they were quickly able to identify, this character needs a better arc. And those kind of things. That's
actually how I do sample edits for developmental editing. I ask the author for an outline, and then I give them feedback on the outline. Not as in depth as if I were doing it paid, but I absolutely that's one of the ways you can vet
an awesome way to go. Yeah.
And it's also a cost. It can be a cost saving measure. If you don't have $2,000, but you maybe have $300 or $400 for that kind of a developmental overview.
Right. You can also get a lot of bang for your buck out of doing some book coaching with a developmental editor and sitting down and talking to us for a little while rather than spending $2,000 to have us do a full edit. Like sitting down and talking about your sticking points.
That's a good idea.
Might be a good investment, and it'll be way less expensive. So that's also an option.
Yeah, sometimes you can hire a developmental editor for like an hour and just to bend their ear about all of your questions and stuff. Learn a lot that way.
Yep.
Something that was talked a lot about during the summit this past week was engaging with your readers and finding out where the readers are falling off the page.
Yeah.
And let's talk a little bit about how readers can be a key part of your publishing team.
Beta reading.
Beta reading.
Yep.
Yeah. What do you think about that, Michael?
I think it depends on the author and like how much they want to involve readers in the process. But taking the readers in a way in which they feel like they also get to be readers do not want to write the story. Readers do not want to dictate the story like at all. And anything that like tries, this is why like when people are like, oh, there'll be like endless personalized stories. No, people want to read things with other people and they want things to be delivered to them. And people don't know what they want, right? They want you to surprise them. They want your story. And that is a real thing. But at the same time, readers also know when your story isn't making sense, what they're excited in. And what I would really pay attention in is less about like a reader's not going to be able to. Some readers are editors and are incredible editors, but like that, then that's a separate service. The reader, like the reader experience, I'd want to understand when are they the most excited and when are they not, and the really like easy qualitative way to test that, because quantitatively, I'll admit we're kind of lacking tools all around, and on Ream ourselves, a focus of ours is getting better analytics. And a lot of the retailers, they don't tell us like when did a reader actually drop off, right? If you go to YouTube, you can see like, hey, this is the retention, and this in a graph. Here is when they drop off on the video. Like that is crazy data. That's what we need. But in lieu of that data, and even in addition to that data, what we also need is that qualitative aspect, which we all can gather. So what I would do is like, hey, if you have a beta reader team, sometimes you just kind of give them like, here are my questions. Let me know how it's going. I'd rather hear like, put a question at the end of the chapter, right when they're actually reading, like as a beta reader, so that they go, hey, like, tell me how you feel right now, right? Or respond in this way if you're thinking this, because that beta reading process where it's like in the story, it's not, because I know the typical beta reading process, at least with authors I talked to myself, was like, here's the Google Doc of like my 10 questions, then here's the actual document, dive in. No. Here's the story, read
integrate
it
them.
and integrate it so that I can get that experience right in it. And think about like what Pixar would do. So there's a really, really great talk somewhere on Vimeo, and it's like this weird link that I found one day. But it's like this guy from Pixar was talking about what Steve Jobs did at Pixar and how he made stories. And he made stories like software, where what he would do is take the raw, what he called, sketches of the animation that we're going to make. And he would get people filling up movie theaters with basically just panels, right? So much cheaper to develop than the actual animation. And he would just he'd tell everyone, get up and leave if you're bored. Literally leave if you're bored at any moment. And he would just track, they left here. They left here, they left here. And they would tweak and tweak and tweak for years, multiple years, before they went from boards and these little like literal just sketches to actual animation. But that's why they were a hit maker, because you don't need all the extra fluff. Just from something very, very raw, you can tell that, which is even better if you're able to give that sort of outline to a reader. Now, this might ruin the whole experience for them. But doing something like that with development errors, that's such a genius idea, because if you're able to give someone the storyboard before you go in and write the story, that's hard for a lot of us who are pantsers. Really, really hard, but it's really efficient if you're able to do it. So anything like that. But yeah, regardless, like I want to know when you're leaving, be super brutal.
Kevin, final thoughts on your author team and what you think is the key thing that's helped you build your author team over the years?
Well, I'm probably the poster child for not using much of a team. So I tend to do a lot of this stuff myself. I tend to do a lot of my own covers. But in terms of like what's helped me build the people that I do work with, honestly, it's my friends. It's my acquaintances and friends in the writing business. Reaching out to other people, getting advice on who to hire. I mean, I'm a member of Ally for a variety of reasons, but like one of the reasons I support them is because of that great big list of providers they have. But I know I can go on to one of my writing Facebook groups and just be like, hey, I need an editor. Like right now, my editor's sick or whatever. I need an editor now, and then help me out. And I'll get a flood of people giving me their recommendations for the people who've worked well for them. It's a great resource. Unbelievable.
Allison, you and I met at an author conference.
Yes.
So there are communities out there where you can find people to add to your team.
Absolutely. Like I said, a lot of the EFEA, CIEP, there are lists there. ReadC, author communities. There's a whole bunch of places to find people. I found folks. My editor is somebody that I worked with at my publishing company. And my cover designer is somebody I met in a Facebook group and have been friends with for years. I'm the rest of my team, because at this point I was in the business as a trad publisher, so I can do my own formatting.
I had one other thought. Don't be afraid to look outside of the box too. I know people have found some amazing typographers and stuff on Fiverr.
Yep, Fiverr.
Fiverr's
cool. A lot of us are on there.
Yeah, or found great cover artists on DeviantArt. There's a lot of other options out there for places to look too.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a whole bunch of great places to look. I think there are. You also have to be really careful, though, because if something sounds too good to be true or sounds too cheap, chances are you're going to get fleeced. So be very careful, vet the person extensively, ask questions. If they're not able or willing to answer those questions, run.
Also, I would ask if they really are more of a, hey, I found them. If you've worked with someone else, give me their names and let me talk to them. Very simple.
Yeah, most editors and cover designers, we've got testimonials on our websites. There's social proof, I have no shortage of people like me. You want to vet me? Please contact these people. And I'm at this organization. I've done this. You can find me in these places. And we're all going to be transparent about that, because ask us questions.
And if you're not transparent about it, it's a red flag.
Right.
Definitely. The only exception I would say is ghostwriters, because sometimes ghostwriters cannot legally tell you who they've written for.
Because of their NDAs.
Right. So there are times that people will have worked on NDA stuff and can't tell you. So, but then generally those people are really open about that, and they'll have things they can point to and samples, even if they can't tell you their client list.
Yeah. Very good. Well, we've kind of gotten to the end of the things here, so I want to go around and give everybody a chance to just share what they're doing and where you can find them. Michael, where can we find you on Ream and other places?
Reamstories.com is where you can join, and Storytellers of the World on YouTube and anywhere else you can find it. You can listen to more fun, hopefully interesting advice from me.
Great. Ellis?
I am on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Prybylski. I'm sure that'll be written somewhere because my last name, don't try and spell it on your own. Save yourself. And I'm also going to be speaking at Author Nation, and I run the Neurodivergent Publishing Conference, which is going to be coming up in February next year.
Oh,
Very cool.
That sounds
that sounds amazing. We'll have to get a link to that, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Kevin?
KevinOMcLaughlin.com has been my website for forever and an age. You can find me there on Facebook. Or just email me.
Yeah. And I'm Jamie Davis. I am the conference director for Author Nation, and you can find more about that at authornation.live. We hope to see all of you in November this year, and we are excited to pull that conference together and make it one of the best experiences for the author community in a long time. So we're going to be continuing to focus on that. In the meantime, I want to thank you all for joining us here for State of the Nation, and come back for another podcast.